Hey everyone, and welcome back. You've been digging into AMD lately, huh? Trying to figure out if Wall Street is missing something big here.
Wow.
We're going to go on that deep dive with you today, and trust me, there's some pretty wild stuff to unpack. We're talking a 12x profit gap with Nvidia strategic acquisitions that have totally reshaped AMD and the leader who basically orchestrated this whole comeback story.
It's great that you're coming at this with a sense of curiosity and not just buying into the hype. That's super important when you're looking at a company like AMD. They've had their share of ups and downs.
Yeah, for sure. And we're starting with something that's kind of puzzling. AMD's stock took a hit in 2024, even though their data center business seemed to be doing really well. It's like, what gives?
The market had these insanely high hopes for AMD. Everyone was predicting they'd just dominate the AI chip market, go head to head with Nvidia and win. But even when a company's growing fast, sometimes those expectations get way ahead of what's actually happening.
So it's not that AMD was doing badly. It's more like they weren't crushing it as hard as everyone thought they would.
Exactly. Their instinct AI GPUs were performing well, don't get me wrong, but they weren't exactly stealing the show from Nvidia. And then you've got this whole other thing looming, the threat of custom AI chips being developed by the big cloud companies like Google's TPU. It just adds
Mhm.
another layer of complexity.
Okay, so we've got this stock drop that seemed to be driven by unmet expectations, but their data center business is still growing at a decent pace. Should investors be worried, or is the market overreacting?
That is the question, isn't it? To really get a handle on this, we need to zoom out and compare AMD to its main rival, Nvidia. And that comparison, it reveals some pretty startling differences.
Let's get into the numbers. We're talking a 5x revenue gap between AMD and Nvidia and get this a 12x profit gap. How do you explain that kind of difference?
Well, NVIDIA, they operate with a much higher gross margin than AMD. It's around 75% for NVIDIA compared to 50% for AMD. And gross margin, it's basically how much profit a company makes on each dollar of revenue. Think of it as a profit multiplier. For every dollar they bring in, NVIDIA keeps a way bigger chunk as profit.
So it's not just about selling more. It's about how much money they make from each sale.
hmm
Why can't AMD reach that same level of profit margin? Are NVIDIA's chips that much better?
It's not just one thing. There are several factors. NVIDIA has a clear lead when it comes to technology, and they've built this incredibly strong ecosystem around their products. That means software developers, data centers, all these key players are deeply invested in NVIDIA's tech, and that gives them serious pricing power. Customers are willing to pay a premium for that performance and the support that comes with it.
But hold on, AMD isn't exactly ignoring research and development, are they? They're obviously trying to catch up.
Oh, absolutely. AMD is putting a good chunk of their revenue back into R&D, about 25% compared to Nvidia's 10%.
Eh.
So their overall spending is lower, but that R&D to revenue ratio, it shows how committed they are to innovation.
Okay, so they're putting their money where their mouth is when it comes to R&D. But this battle for AI chips, that feels like the core of the issue. To understand where AMD stands, we really need to break down what's happening in this fight for AI dominance.
Let's zero in on the two main areas, training and inference training. That's where AI models learn from huge amounts of data. And AMD's MI300A chips, they actually offer a cost advantage over NVIDIA's H100s in this area.
So in that initial learning phase, AMD might actually have an edge.
It's possible, but NVIDIA is always pushing the limits of performance. So even if AMD gains an advantage, it might not last. Now, inference, that's where the trained AI model actually uses what it's learned to make predictions or decisions in real-world applications.
Got it. Train the model, then put it to work.
Yeah.
And I've heard AMD might be more competitive on the inference side of things.
That's right. But there's another player we can't ignore, Google's TPU. These chips are designed specifically for AI inference, and they're super cost-effective, coming in about 30% of the cost of what AMD and NVIDIA are offering.
That changes things up a bit. So even if AMD surpasses NVIDIA, they've got competition coming from all sides. This is a complex battleground.
Yeah, it's not a simple two-horse race. It's constantly shifting and evolving. But here's the important takeaway for you. Despite all this, AMD's data center growth is keeping pace with the overall market, and that's a good sign.
Okay, so they're holding their own in a really tough market, but they can't just sit back and relax, right? What are some of the strategies AMD is using to grab a bigger slice of that AI pie?
One thing working in their favor right now is the supply constraint issue. NVIDIA is struggling to meet the huge demand for their chips, and that creates an opportunity for AMD to step in as the reliable alternative. Sometimes just being available is just as important as being the absolute best.
That makes sense. If you can't get NVIDIA's chips, AMD starts to look pretty good. What about TSMC, the company that actually makes these chips? What role do they play in all of this?
That's an interesting angle. TSMC has a strong incentive to diversify its client base, spread the risk, so they might be inclined to give AMD a little extra support. After all, a healthy AMD helps TSMC balance out its reliance on any single customer like Nvidia.
Right. So AMD has some external factors that could work in their favor. But let's be realistic. What are the areas where they absolutely have to improve if they want to shake that second best label? What are the keys to their long-term success?
They need to keep pouring resources into R&D. It's not enough to keep up. They need to be pushing the boundaries. They also need to build a stronger ecosystem around their products, attract developers, and create a real sense of community. That's something Nvidia does really well, and it's something AMD needs to address head on.
That's a tall order. Given their resources and the lead Nvidia has, is that even realistic?
It's definitely a challenge, but not impossible. Look at how strategic acquisitions have completely transformed AMD. They've gone from being mainly a CPU company to a full-blown AI solutions provider.
Acquisitions. That's something that really jumped out at me in my research. It seems like a really smart strategy for AMD.
They've used acquisitions to fundamentally change the game. It's not just about catching up, it's about redefining who they are and what they offer.
Okay, let's break down some of those big acquisitions. Starting with ATI back in 2006, what did that bring to the table?
That was a pivotal move. It laid the foundation for AMD's GPU technology, putting them in direct competition with Nvidia. It was a bold move that set the stage for everything that came after.
Then there was the Xilinx acquisition in 2020. That was a huge deal. Why was that so significant?
That's when AMD really jumped into the world of AI hardware. Xilinx, they specialize in these things called FPGAs, field programmable gate arrays.
FPGAs. Not all of us are chip experts. What's so special about them in the context of AI?
Right, good point. FPGAs are incredibly flexible chips. Imagine a chip that can be reconfigured on the fly to do different tasks. That's an FPGA. They're perfect for AI because you can tailor them to the specific needs of the algorithms you're running.
So they're like the Swiss Army knives of the chip world, adaptable and ready for any AI task.
Exactly. And AMD saw the potential of that flexibility for AI, and that's why they went after Xilinx. But they didn't stop there. In 2023, they acquired Nod AI, a software company. What was the thinking behind that move?
From hardware to software, that feels like a pretty big shift in focus.
It was a crucial step in building a complete AI solution. Before AMD was focused on the chips themselves, now they're adding the software tools and the expertise to make those chips really shine.
So they're building this whole world around AI, from the physical chips to the software that runs on them, making it easier for developers and businesses to use their technology.
Huh.
And they've continued down that path by acquiring Beyond Limits and Lambda, really boosting their AI capabilities.
That's right. It's about creating this cohesive and powerful system that's more than just individual pieces of technology.
So the big takeaway here is that acquisitions have been absolutely essential to AMD's growth and setting them up for success in the world of AI. But there's another factor we can't ignore: leadership.
You're talking about Lisa Su, right? AMD's CEO. She's the one who's really driven this comeback story.
Exactly. Under her leadership, they've challenged Intel's dominance in the CPU market and closed the gap with Nvidia in key areas. What's her secret? What makes her such an effective leader?
She's laser focused on R&D and cost effectiveness. She's making smart investments, pushing the boundaries of what's possible, but always with an eye on the bottom line.
She sounds like someone who knows how to get things done. Her leadership definitely makes me feel optimistic about AMD's future. But we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore.
We're just getting started. We've laid the groundwork, but now it's time to go deeper into AMD's potential, the challenges they face, and what it all means for you.
Stay with us. In part 2, we're going to tackle the big question: is AMD truly undervalued? And could this be your chance to get in early on something really revolutionary?
Here's something to think about. What stood out to you the most from what we've talked about so far? What are your initial impressions of AMD's prospects? Think about it, and we'll pick up right where we left off in part 2.
Welcome back. I hope you've had some time to mull over AMD's position in the market and maybe even started forming some of your own opinions.
Yeah, it's hard not to get caught up in all the possibilities, especially with a company as dynamic as AMD.
Totally. It's amazing how AMD has shifted its focus so much in recent years. It's like they've completely reinvented themselves.
It really is remarkable. They've strategically positioned themselves to be a major force in the AI landscape, which is huge when you consider that not that long ago, they were known mainly for CPUs. Now they offer this whole suite of AI solutions from the hardware to the software.
And they're going all in on AI. I mean, they've even acquired companies specializing in industrial-grade cognitive AI and deep learning infrastructure. They're clearly playing the long game here.
Absolutely. They're laying the groundwork for sustainable growth in a market that's constantly evolving. And this is where those strategic acquisitions we talked about become so important.
Right. Each acquisition seems like it was carefully chosen to fill a specific gap in their offerings. It's like they're putting together a puzzle piece by piece, but instead of a static picture, they're building this powerful machine.
And the pieces are starting to fit together really well. By integrating hardware and software, they're creating a more seamless and powerful experience for their customers. This is where they have the potential to really set themselves apart from competitors like Nvidia, who have traditionally been more focused on hardware.
So it's like AMD is playing catch-up, but with a twist. They're not just copying what Nvidia is doing, they're forging their own path, leveraging their own unique strengths.
Exactly. They understand that the AI landscape is vast and there's room for multiple winners. AMD is carving out its own space by offering a different kind of value proposition, focusing on this holistic approach that combines both hardware and software.
Okay, so we've established that AMD is making some smart moves, but let's be real. They still face some big challenges.
Yeah.
What are some of the hurdles they need to overcome?
The AI field is incredibly competitive, and Nvidia is a tough opponent. They have a massive head start in terms of market share, brand recognition, and that crucial ecosystem we talked about. Developers are already comfortable working with Nvidia's platform, and it won't be easy to change that.
So what can AMD realistically do to level the playing field? What are the keys to their long-term success?
Continued investment in R&D is crucial. They've shown they're willing to invest, but the pace of innovation in AI is relentless. They can't afford to fall behind.
It's like a constant arms race in the tech world. You snooze, you lose.
Exactly. AMD also needs to focus on building its own ecosystem, attracting developers and cultivating a community around its products. They need to make it easy and appealing for developers to choose AMD. Think of it like building a city. You need the infrastructure, the businesses, and the people to make it thrive.
Create that buzz, that feeling of being part of something new and innovative. What else? What are some of the other challenges they'll need to address?
Another big one is proving they're in it for the long haul. They're currently benefiting from NVIDIA's supply constraints, but they can't rely on that forever. They need to convince companies that are investing heavily in AI that AMD isn't just a temporary solution, but a reliable partner.
So demonstrating that staying power is really important. It's not enough to be the alternative. They need to be the go-to choice.
You got it. To do that, they need to consistently deliver top-notch products, offer competitive prices, and provide excellent customer support. It's all about building trust and showing they're here to stay.
It's about going above and beyond expectations, not just meeting them. Now, let's bring it back to you, the listener. Why does all of this matter to you? What's the takeaway for someone who's thinking about AMD as an investment?
Here's the bottom line. AMD is at a crossroads. They have enormous potential, but they're also facing some real challenges. The question for you is, do you believe in their vision? Do you think they have what it takes to become a leader in the AI space?
It's definitely a gamble, but it could pay off big time. To make a smart decision, you need to carefully consider the risks and the rewards. Look past the hype and understand the fundamentals of their business, their competition, and their long-term strategy.
And that's what we're trying to help you do with this deep dive. We're giving you the knowledge you need to make your own assessment. Just remember, we're not giving financial advice. We're simply providing a deeper understanding of where AMD stands in the market.
We're giving you the tools to think for yourself and come to your own conclusions. But before we jump into the last part of our deep dive, let's take a step back and think about the bigger picture. What does AMD's story tell us about the tech industry in general?
What's really interesting is how AMD's story mirrors the constant change in the tech industry. We're seeing a shift in power, a blurring of the lines between hardware and software, and this never-ending race to innovate.
It's a thrilling time to be following this industry, and AMD is right in the middle of it. Their success or failure will have a ripple effect through the entire tech world.
No doubt. And it all comes down to execution. They have the pieces in place, they have a clear vision, but can they actually deliver?
That is the million-dollar question, and we'll explore that further in Part 3. We'll really dig into the financial side of AMD's business and get a better understanding of their valuation.
We'll look at their financial reports, analyze their potential for growth, and ultimately help you answer the big question, is AMD undervalued?
Stick around, because the best part of our deep dive is still to come. We're about to get into the nitty-gritty, and I can't wait to hear what you think about where AMD is headed. Okay, so we've talked a lot about AMD's big moves, their competition, and now it's time to get down to the numbers. We've been dancing around this question of valuation, but let's get specific. What do AMD's financials tell us about where they stand today and where they might be headed?
We keep coming back to this gap between AMD and Nvidia, right? Their revenue and profit, AMD's revenue, it's about a fifth of Nvidia's, and their profit is even further behind. So the question for you becomes, can AMD close that gap? And if so, how?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? So let's break it down. What are the key things driving AMD's valuation right now? And what should investors be keeping a close eye on?
One of the most important things is their growth trajectory. Even with that stock dip in 2024, their data center business is growing like crazy. They're gaining market share, and their new chips are proving they can compete. But the real question is, can they keep this up?
Right, because just because they've been doing well doesn't mean it'll last forever. What are some of the potential roadblocks that could slow them down in the next few years?
Well, the competition in AI, it's intense and it's only going to get tougher. Nvidia isn't standing still, and other companies like Google with their custom AI chips are jumping into the ring. AMD has to show that they can not only compete but actually win in this constantly changing market. If you were Lisa Su, how would you approach this?
Hmm. If I were Lisa Su, I'd be obsessed with innovation, pushing my team to create even more powerful and efficient AI chips, chips that give them a real edge over the competition.
Yeah.
But it's not just about the chips themselves, right? There's that whole ecosystem we've been talking about.
You got it. AMD needs to cultivate a thriving ecosystem around their chips. That means bringing in software developers, data scientists, all the key players who can create the applications and tools that really make the most of AMD's hardware. It's about building a community, a buzz that attracts people.
Making AMD the obvious choice for anyone working in AI, not just a fallback option. But we can't forget about profits. We've discussed how AMD's profit margins are way lower than Nvidia's. Is there any reason to think they can improve in that area?
Improving those margins is crucial. Remember gross margin. It's the difference between how much it costs to make a product and the revenue you get from selling it. A higher gross margin means more profit on every single chip they sell. If AMD wants a higher valuation, they need to show they can reach a level of profitability that's closer to Nvidia's.
But isn't there a risk that if they raise prices too much to improve those margins, they'll lose customers to Nvidia or someone else?
It's a tough balancing act for sure. They have to stay competitive on price, but also keep costs under control and deliver those groundbreaking products that justify a premium price. It's a challenge, but it can be done. One way that they could potentially boost those margins is by focusing on higher value products and services.
So instead of just selling the chips themselves, they could offer these bundles that include software support, maybe even consulting services, all geared towards specific AI applications that could let them charge more and improve those margins.
Exactly. And then there are the external factors, things that AMD can't really control. The global economy, for example, that can have a huge impact on demand for their products. And the supply chain issues, especially in the semiconductor industry, those can cause delays and increase costs.
So there's a lot going on here. It's not just about looking at AMD's numbers in a vacuum. You have to understand the bigger picture, all the forces that are shaping the industry as a whole.
You're right. It's about connecting the dots and seeing the whole picture. And that's where your own critical thinking comes in. When you're evaluating AMD, you have to weigh all these factors, consider the risks and the rewards, and ultimately make your own informed decision.
We can crunch the numbers, identify trends, make educated guesses, but there's no magic crystal ball. The future's always unpredictable, and that's part of what makes investing so tricky and so exciting.
It's about calculating those odds, making informed bets, and having the confidence to trust your gut. We've given you this deep dive into AMD, their strengths, their weaknesses, the opportunities and challenges they face. Now it's up to you to decide.
We've looked at AMD from all angles, their strategy, their position in the market, their leadership, their financials, and all the things happening in the industry around them. So the big question after all of this is AMD undervalued?
Like most things in life, it's not a simple yes or no answer. AMD has a compelling story. They're making smart moves to be part of this AI explosion. They've got strong leaders, a solid range of products, and a clear vision for the future.
And there's always a but, isn't there?
But they also have some serious obstacles to overcome. They're still catching up in a super competitive market, and their profits aren't as strong as their main rival. Their success depends on them executing their plan perfectly, navigating all the ups and downs of the market, and proving to investors that they're more than just a good deal. It's a story of potential, but also some uncertainty. A company with a lot to prove, but also a lot to gain.
It's a gamble on the future, a bet that they can deliver on their promises.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, the decision to invest in AMD or not, it's a personal one. There's no right or wrong answer. It all comes down to your risk tolerance, your investment goals, and how much you believe in AMD's ability to make it big.
We've armed you with the information, the insights, the framework to make that decision. Now it's your turn to take all that and figure out what it means for you.
Here's one last thing to think about. This AI revolution, it's just getting started. Things are changing fast, and there will be winners and losers along the way.
AMD is going all in on AI, and their journey is going to be one to watch. So stay tuned, keep learning, and never stop asking questions. That's what the deep dive is all about, giving you the knowledge and insights you need to navigate this crazy world and make smart decisions.
Until next time, keep on exploring, and thanks for joining us.